The United Nations Global Counter-Terrorism Strategy. General Assembly, Resolution 6288 of 8 September 2006. The General Assembly, guided by the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations, and reaffirming its role under the Charter, including on questions related to international peace and security. Reiterating its strong condemnation of terrorism in all its forms and manifestations, committed by whomever, wherever and for whatever purposes, as it constitutes one of the most serious threats to international peace and security. Reaffirming the Declaration on Measures to Eliminate International Terrorism, contained in the Annex to General Assembly Resolution 4960 of 9 December 1994, the Declaration to supplement the 1994 Declaration on Measures to Eliminate International Terrorism, contained in the Annex to General Assembly Resolution 51210 of 17 December 1996, and the 2005 World Summit Outcome, in particular its section on terrorism. Recalling all General Assembly resolutions on measures to eliminate international terrorism, including Resolution 4651 of 9 December 1991. And Security Council resolutions on threats to international peace and security caused by terrorist acts, as well as relevant resolutions of the General Assembly on the protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms while countering terrorism. Recalling also that, in the 2005 World Summit Outcome, world leaders rededicated themselves to support all efforts to uphold the sovereign equality of all states, respect their territorial integrity and political independence, to refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force in any manner inconsistent with the purposes and principles of the United Nations, to uphold the resolution of disputes by peaceful means and in conformity with the principles of justice and international law, the right to self-determination of peoples which remain under colonial domination or foreign occupation, non-interference in the internal affairs of states, respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms, respect for the equal rights of all without distinction as to race, sex, language or religion, international cooperation in solving international problems of an economic, social, cultural or humanitarian character, and the fulfillment in good faith of the obligations assumed in accordance with the Charter. Recalling further the mandate contained in the 2005 World Summit Outcome that the General Assembly should develop without delay the elements identified by the Secretary-General for a counter-terrorism strategy, with a view to adopting and implementing a strategy to promote comprehensive, coordinated and consistent responses, at the national, regional and international levels, to counter terrorism, which also takes into account the conditions conducive to the spread of terrorism. Reaffirming that acts, methods and practices of terrorism in all its forms and manifestations are activities aimed at the destruction of human rights, fundamental freedoms and democracy, threatening territorial integrity, security of states and destabilizing legitimately constituted governments, and that the international community should take the necessary steps to enhance cooperation to prevent and combat terrorism. Reaffirming also that terrorism cannot and should not be associated with any religion, nationality, civilization or ethnic group. Reaffirming further member states' determination to make every effort to reach an agreement on and conclude a comprehensive convention on international terrorism, including by resolving the outstanding issues related to the legal definition and scope of the acts covered by the convention, so that it can serve as an effective instrument to counter terrorism. Continuing to acknowledge that the question of convening a high-level conference under the auspices of the United Nations to formulate an international response to terrorism in all its forms and manifestations could be considered. Recognizing that development, peace and security, and human rights are interlinked and mutually reinforcing. Bearing in mind the need to address the conditions conducive to the spread of terrorism. Affirming member states' determination to continue to do all they can to resolve conflict, end foreign occupation, confront oppression, eradicate poverty, promote sustained economic growth, sustainable development, global prosperity, good governance, human rights for all and rule of law, improve intercultural understanding and ensure respect for all religions, religious values, beliefs or cultures. 1. Expresses its appreciation for the report entitled Uniting Against Terrorism, Recommendations for a Global Counter-Terrorism Strategy submitted by the Secretary-General to the General Assembly. 2. Adopts the present resolution and its annex as the United Nations Global Counter-Terrorism Strategy, the strategy. 3. Decides, without prejudice to the continuation of the discussion in its relevant committees of all their agenda items related to terrorism and counter-terrorism, to undertake the following steps for the effective follow-up of the strategy. A. To launch the strategy at a high-level segment of its 61st session. B. To examine in 2 years progress made in the implementation of the strategy, and to consider updating it to respond to changes, recognizing that many of the measures contained in the strategy can be achieved immediately, some will require sustained work through the coming few years and some should be treated as long-term objectives. C. To invite the Secretary-General to contribute to the future deliberations of the General Assembly on the review of the implementation and updating of the strategy. D. To encourage Member States, the United Nations and other appropriate international, regional and sub-regional organizations to support the implementation of the strategy, including through mobilizing resources and expertise. E. To further encourage non-governmental organizations and civil society to engage, as appropriate, on how to enhance efforts to implement the strategy. 4. Decides to include in the provisional agenda of its 62nd session an item entitled the United Nations Global Counter-Terrorism Strategy. 99th Plenary Meeting, 8 September 2006.